well recognized and others perhaps less so. We have yet to do the work to unpack all of that. That's going to be quite a job.
Thank you. So yeah, if you want to go now to the mobility question of moving around the country.
Sure. And just before I do, I'll mention that the College of Psychologists does not require that people have undergone personal psychotherapy or counseling. However, our members are expected to attend to their fitness to practice. And so if our members are suffering from emotional problems and things that will affect their functioning as professionals, they're responsible to seek appropriate assistance or to restrict their practice until such time as they are fit to practice. So it's not a prerequisite to registration. It's an ongoing obligation for members to attend to their own needs for their own mental and emotional health. Now, in terms of mobility, within Canada, there is an agreement on internal trade which speaks to the mobility of professionals, among other things. And if you are registered and authorized to practice a profession or an occupation in a province or territory in the country and or to use an occupational title, then the agreement on internal trade and the legislation that spun off from that, including amendments to the Regulated Health Professions Act, require that that registration be recognized in a new province or territory if you move, but only if there is the same equivalent certificate of registration. So if you're authorized to practice psychology and call yourself a psychologist in one part of the country, and you would like to move and you're not in any disciplinary trouble, you're in good standing and all of that, then the receiving jurisdiction is expected to issue you a certificate of registration as a psychologist authorizing the practice of psychology. Now, we are permitted to require that you take a jurisprudence exam if you're moving around. So what you will find is that once you get licensed or registered in one part of the country as a psychologist, you should be able to move fairly readily to another part of the country. But you will probably have to show that you've been practicing recently, and so you're currently competent, and you'll probably have to show that you know the laws and standards for that particular province. So within Canada, movement will become, or actually has become, easier now with this revised agreement on internal trade. If you go to Quebec, of course, you'll have to demonstrate fluency in French within a year of getting registered there. If you want to go to the U.S., if you actually meet the requirements for doctoral level psychologist registration in Ontario, it will stand you in very good stead if you're thinking of moving to the U.S. In any event, you will have done the examination for professional practice in psychology. Because we require 3,000 hours of supervision and the EPPP, and because we require an oral exam, that is equivalent to pretty well the highest requirements you would have to meet in the U.S. And so it will make it easier to move into the U.S. And some jurisdictions in the U.S. are actually in a reciprocity agreement with Ontario, so that if you're registered or licensed in good standing in one of those jurisdictions, then all you have to do is pass the jurisprudence and ethics exam and maybe attend an interview to get registered or licensed in another one of those. In addition, the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, of which all the Canadian and U.S. regulators are a member, or most of them are anyway, except the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, I guess, then you can apply for something called a Certificate of Professional Qualification. And most registrants in Ontario would be able to meet that. Not everyone, but most registrants as psychologists in Ontario would be able to meet the requirements for that certificate. And that certificate is recognized in at least 37, maybe more jurisdictions now, as meeting the requirements for the degree and examinations. And so all you would be required to do again is probably a jurisprudence exam and maybe an interview. So once you're registered here in Ontario, particularly at the doctoral level, movement is relatively easy. At master's level, movement is fairly easy within Canada. There's not likely to be any mobility to the U.S. because only 2 jurisdictions register at master's level.
Anyone else care to comment on the mobility? Go ahead.
Well, for our college, with the two titles that we have, which are unique to Ontario, I believe, it's a bit of a can of worms, but particularly at this stage, where we're just trying to figure out in Ontario and within this new college who the members will be and how the two titles differ and so on. However, we are told by the Ministry of Health and the other ministry that's looking after the Ontario mobility legislation implementation, that the key factor really is the scope of practice. So if somebody is registered in another province, it doesn't matter what their title is. If the scope of practice for the regulatory body where they are registered is substantially similar to our scope of practice, then we would eventually need to automatically, if you like, register them here with, I think, the same proviso that they would be required to write the jurisprudence and professional practice examination. The title thing is really a bit of a conundrum. What's happening in different provinces around psychotherapy and counseling is it's very much of a patchwork, and probably Michelle will say something about that. Maybe you could talk about that a bit. But Nova Scotia has legislation, and they're creating a college of counseling therapists. That's the title that they're using. The requirement will be, as I understand it, a master's degree in counseling. My understanding is that psychotherapy would be defined as a subset of counseling in Nova Scotia, let's say, and other jurisdictions that may use the same framework to regulate, which BC has been pursuing for, well, 10, 15, 20 years, a long time. And I think they have a plan or a draft legislation or whatever in front of them. They're negotiating with government, or were not too long ago, to develop a college of also counseling therapists, I believe, that would include a whole list of different professionals, counselors and psychotherapists. And again, psychotherapists would be a subset of the counseling therapist designation, I presume. Alberta has a different scheme altogether. They have a list of restricted activities, and one of them is a psychosocial intervention, which is can be under law, can be performed only by certain authorized regulated professionals, including psychologists, doctors, nurses, social workers, etc. Their list is slightly different from Ontario's, and but they're not creating an actual college of either counseling therapists or psychotherapists. And then Quebec, of course, is doing its own unique things. Maybe you want to talk about that, or maybe Catherine would. Anyway,
okay.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, intermobility. Right now, in the Quebec side, because I'm on the Quebec side as well, Ontario and Ottawa on both sides, I'm within the Order of Psychologists in the Quebec side, which has required to pass a master's degree, and they changed to 3 years ago to a doctorate degree, has to become mandatory to have a doctorate degree. But if you were looking for work in educational counseling, for example, in school, high school, or vocational guidance, career, choices of, they have the order of conseiller d'orientation, from a vocational guidance counselor. And the requirement over there is a master's degree. And you also have the psychoeducateur, psychoeducator, which exists in Vancouver and Colombie-Britannique, and also exists in Quebec. Then it requires both a BA degree can do that stuff, and a master's degree can do other stuff. So we have 3 orders which are regulated in the Quebec side. That's for people who want to do counseling. And then is where you want to go if you want to work in Quebec. So you want to work in the education field, or psychology, or psychoeducation field. So there's 3 different kind of. So I don't know if that explained a bit about in Quebec, if you want to go and work in Quebec, as for in Ontario and as for our Counseling and Psychotherapy Association, well, we have this certification process which make you a Canadian certified counselor. And within those provinces which weren't regulated before, or are not regulated, or are going to be regulated, are entitled to certification. And it's not in every province. I know it's complicated, but it's not in every provinces. But in some provinces, clients from, for example, the Programme d'aide aux employés, which I don't know how to translate in English. It's like
employee assistance programs.
Okay, and they have some funding for employees to go and seek counseling intervention. And these people recognize CCC in some provinces as to be able to have this insurance to pay for their clients. So you see, it's not in every province. It's different from one province to another, depending where you work. And we also have we just received, CCPA was formally recognized, as Joyce said, as far as the National Assessment Project by the federal government in December. We are receiving funding now that will help, I guess, foreign and differently trained healthcare professional practitioner to find job in the area of counseling and all over Canada. So we're looking forward to have some kind of a national assessment project that perhaps could give us standard for our own Canadian practitioner in counseling. So that is something that it's coming very soon, and we're working on it. It's a big project. And overall, I think in the future to come, all provinces seem to be willing to get regulated. So, I don't know, 5 to 10 years from now, probably all provinces will have their own college of counseling or either psychology or psychotherapy. So, I don't know if that helped. It gives you what it takes now, and perhaps in the future if you want to work in Canada.
Thank you. So now we have 20 minutes left, so I want to give the audience here some chance to ask their own questions. So if you guys just want to ask, if you have any questions, you can ask, you can direct it to a specific person or just to everyone. So I'll go, Tara, go ahead.
I guess to the CPA, but if you're recognized as a registered psychological associate within Ontario, and I know as of right now in Nova Scotia you can be a psychologist with your master's degree, and it's, I think to my knowledge, it's the same type of training. So what would that process be like if you're a registered psych associate and then you want to move to Nova Scotia? Could you be recognized as a psychologist there, or what would that process?
Well, I'm not sure that's a question of CPA. Yeah. That's more of a regulatory question, because remember, CPA, we accredit the programs, we don't certify the individuals. So maybe Catherine could speak to that.
As I understand it, under the Agreement on Internal Trade and the related legislation, the psychological associate registrants in Ontario would have the same scope of practice as the psychologists in Nova Scotia, because they actually have the same scope of practice as psychologists in Ontario. And so it's most likely that you would be eligible for registration as a psychologist in Nova Scotia. Now, if you didn't become registered as a psychological associate here in Ontario, you would, as you have said, have to meet very similar requirements to our psychological associate registration requirements to become registered in Nova Scotia as a master's level psychologist. The board in Nova Scotia was considering doing a similar thing to what we're talking about, and that was to discontinue master's level registration. But at this point in time, their government is not permitting them to proceed with that.
This is for the Transitional Council. I was just wondering, you had mentioned that you set out to be a registered psychotherapist. You're looking at 450 hours of direct client contact hours. I'm thinking for quite a few people finishing up their Master's of Education degree here, that currently, as it stands, we'd be graduating with around 120 hours because of direct client contact hours. And I'm just wondering, you had mentioned something about both pre-registration and also you want to be able to cover the individuals that would be in limbo. And I think a lot of people, including myself, are going to be graduating, quote unquote, in limbo because we won't have the required direct client contact hours coming out of our degree. So can you speak a little bit to that process?
Well, that's an interesting question.